Welcome to the Remarkable Retail Podcast, Season 8, the Baker's Dozen episode, presented by Salonis. I'm Michael LeBlanc.
And I'm Steve Dennis.
In the first of several episodes recorded live in the Bamboozer Podcast Studio during Shop Talk 2024 in Las Vegas, our guest is David J. Katz, Executive Vice President, Chief Marketing Officer, Randa Apparel and Accessories, a preeminent retail thinker, good friend of the pod and good friend of ours. If you are a major department store or specialty retailer, you'll know Randa and David, as they and he lives at the apex of fashion accessories worldwide.
Yeah, I've always enjoyed my conversations with David over the years. It seems like every conference we go to, we end up hanging out and he shares some wisdom. And I think people, even if they don't know his name or don't know the Randa name, are going to be really fascinated by his perspective. Very much a super knowledgeable guy. Also a straight shooter, which we always appreciate.
Excitement is building for the release of Leaders Leap. This week, I gave copies that I brought all the way back from Vegas to the CEO of Sobeys, Michael Medline, his good friend, listens to the pod, and guest friend of the pod, Greg Hicks from Canadian Tire. He was speaking as well, his amazing chief of staff, Rachel, and the force of nature that is Susan O'Brien, their CMO. All wanted to pass along their thanks for the book, so thank you for that. And by the way, Susan loved your article in HBR, so she hadn't seen that. I sent her a link, and she said it was fantastic. So they all wanted me to pass along thanks and congratulations. Now, we've got a lot going on. As we said, Leaders Leap's coming out Tuesday in the U.S., April 23rd, a little later in other markets, including Canada. So what's going on? There's still some things happening. We're doing a big launch. Tell the people the update on the book launch.
Yeah, 3 quick things. Well, first of all, for just a few more days, there are some great pre-order specials. You can see those on my website, stephenpdennis.com. We'll also highlight those in the show notes. Pre-orders are important to get that big pop on the release date, so I appreciate if you will do that and look for the ebook and Audible versions very shortly. Then our big announcement, just repeating from last week in case people didn't hear it in a bit more detail, on Monday, April 22nd at noon U.S. Eastern Time is our virtual book launch event. We've got some really exciting guests, Seth Godin, Bridget Brennan, who is the leading authority on women consumers, and Sally Elliott, co-leader of Spencer Stuart's global retail practice, will be joining us. They've all been guests on the pod, as has Hal Lawton, president and CEO of Tractor Supply, who will be making a special appearance. So pre-register, secure your spot today. Again, details in the show notes. And then lastly, some guy named Michael LeBlanc is going to come all the way down to Dallas, Texas for the first time, I understand.
Yeah.
We're doing a live in-person launch event, which is being hosted by the DFW Retail Executive Association at SMU's Collins Center. That is Wednesday, the 24th at 6 p.m. We're doing some cocktails, then our program, a book signing, a whole bunch of fun. So there are a few spots that still remain. Again, details in the show note. If you're in Dallas, please come out and see us. If you're in Austin or whatever, want to drive up, we'll show you a good time.
Yeah, I'm really looking forward to it. I've been to Texas, I've been to Houston, but not been to Dallas, not been to Austin. And of course, I'm a big fan of barbecue, so I'm very excited. So looking forward to that, and as well our time on the stage together. All right, let's get to news of the week. So let's start with a little bit of macroeconomic stuff. U.S. jobs report surprises to the upside. It's funny, if I look back on all the episodes where we talk about jobs, we typically are not disappointed. Like the numbers tend to be the machine of the U.S. economy continues to go. It's pretty impressive.
It's the gift that keeps on giving, I think, surprising, well, maybe not surprising everybody anymore, because as you say, it's just continued to be quite strong. Unemployment dropped back down to 3.8%. Good wage growth as well, 4% year over year. Now, if you look at, I was just seeing something on CNBC where they were talking about, if you look at wage growth over like the past 3 years, relative to inflation over the past 3 years, wages have not kept pace cumulatively, but over the past 6 months or so, they have. So that's generally good news. There's also been a jump in labor force participation. Most of the job growth is in services. Actually, some of what's going on, even with all the political machinations around immigration, it appears that the improvement in immigration is actually supporting some of this job growth and increasing the amount of labor force participation. So with that kind of supply and demand, not to get into the macroeconomics of this too much, it's probably not likely to be inflationary. So we'll see how that all pans out. Now, I always want to point out that we know that many of our listeners are in economies that don't have such robust unemployment. I think actually I saw that Canada's unemployment rate went up to like 6.1% or something. Does that sound right to you?
The biggest thing about Canada, you mentioned immigration, of course, is we're trying to understand. We jumped our economy, our population now to 41 million from 37 million in a couple of years. So we're trying to understand, shouldn't the economy be doing better? Because there's a whole lot more mouths to feed and people shopping. So we actually think a little disappointed because there's a lot of people, a lot more people in Canada, but the numbers aren't really, working out the way exactly we hoped, at least in the short term. All right, well let's get to the retail news. So we got to start with this Amazon story, which is just blowing my mind. I think it's blowing everybody's mind. And ostensibly the story was about what they're going to do with Just Walk Out and their grocery stores. It's not at all about Just Walk Out, and they're going to put the smart carts in and kind of, saying out loud what we've all been talking about, what they've actually talked about, that the Just Walk Out isn't the game changer for grocery. But nested within this was the fact that Just Walk Out was actually kind of like the Wizard of Oz, and behind the curtain there was 1,000 people in India watching videos. There's a joke going around. I can't remember it now, the AI joke about Amazon.
Well, yeah, I call this the JWO WTF moment because that story was quite shocking. Friend of the pod and great retail analyst Sucharita Kodali has been doing some research on this, and she got a little bit more information from Joe Jensen, the Amazon executive who oversees this area. And there may be a couple of things that aren't totally clear. Amazon did not confirm the 1,000 worker in India piece of this. So that's a little bit, there's reporting that says that, but who maybe got a little bit overplayed. Some of the stories made it sound like they were bailing completely on Just Walk Out, which is not true. They basically said they're ending it in their grocery stores, large format stores going forward. And they intend to keep focusing it on more of the smaller format stores, which I think has to do largely with just the sheer cost of the technology. So that's some of the things that have had people concerned. I will point to also friend of the pod, Chris Walton, wrote a very good article about this in Forbes. So maybe we'll put that in the show notes, but he did a good job of kind of dissecting what this all means. So rather than spend a ton of time on that, maybe we'll point people to that. But yeah, interesting moves, and a lot of folks scratching their head about the non-automated part of Just Walk Out.
Well, what did somebody say
from India? Apparently,
well, apparently AI for the joke was AI for Amazon meant all in India. But anyway,
too soon.
We got a little glimpse into Shein profitability with the chart, and you'll hear us talking to David about the fast fashion and the direct from China model and his thoughts on that. But talk about what you noticed for the Shein growth versus profitability.
Well, as we've talked about, and as you mentioned, we'll talk about with David a little bit because there's plenty of issues related to Shein, but there's no question from a revenue standpoint, they have grown at a crazy rate, supposedly to about $45 billion in GMV, gross merchandise value. But also the report said that they more than doubled their profits year over year to about $2 billion, which is, if you think about the early days of Amazon, sort of famously losing all sorts of money. It appears that Shein's actually making a good amount of money. And just for context, if we look at other fast fashion players, that $2 billion would be considerably more than H&M, which of course is a major player, but not nearly as much as Inditex, which is the most known for their chain Zara. But, the thing, of course, is a lot of the controversy, which, again, we'll talk about with David a little bit, but also waiting to see about the Shein IPO, whether that's going to happen or not, whether it'll get through any of the regulatory issues, which are many, to go public in the U.S. on the New York Stock Exchange, or what now appears most likely is that they'll go public in London later this year.
All right, let's talk about the lipstick index, which is one of those things that talk about the gift that keeps on giving. The beauty industry has been on a real tear both a little bit during COVID and post-COVID, and we had the CEO of Ulta on, and they've been growing incredibly. Just announced an expansion to Mexico, but we're also seeing a few cracks, so to speak, in the beauty market. Talk about what your impressions of that are.
Well, there was some big news. Actually, Dave Kimball, the CEO of Ulta, who, as you mentioned, we've had on the pod, he was at an investor conference and he made some comments about the slowdown in the beauty business. Now, longtime listeners may remember, as we've looked through the monthly sales numbers and quarterly reports, we've often remarked upon how strong, kind of unusually strong, the beauty business has been. I would say that I don't completely understand it. I do sort of tie it in one respect to the lipstick index, which if people aren't familiar with that, it's basically the idea that even when the economy is tough, things like lipstick often do really well because it's kind of a small luxury, small treat. So basically what Dave said was that they're starting to see a pretty significant slowdown, and that sent their stock down quite a bit. Estee Lauder, also, of course, a big player, announced some layoffs. Elf Beauty, we've had their chief brand officer on the pod as well. Their stock got hit. So I think there's this kind of general feeling that this run or tear, as you say, that the beauty industry has been on is maybe coming to an end. People definitely bailed out of all the beauty stocks last week.
Well, it seemed to me when I saw that news that for a long time they've been kind of impervious as a category to the discretionary pullback, the pullback in discretionary goods, people trading down and going to essentials, certainly in Canada where there's an affordability issue, I think to some degree in the US. So I think they're just hitting the wall of reality that there's, it doesn't always go up and to the left, or
yes.
doesn't always go up and to the right, let's say. Sometimes it goes up and to the left. Oops.
Yeah, some things go. Yeah. I think what goes up to the left is one of Elon's rockets, and then it spirals down.
And then it just spins out and blows up.
For unscheduled rapid disassembly.
Let's. I noticed a bunch of things that kind of tied back to your 2024 prediction. So let's tick off a few boxes here. One, you had a prediction around commercial real estate. We've been talking about it on the pod for years. This shift of where people are working, slow-moving crisis. I think you described it as. There's some numbers coming out that seem to validate what's happening and our perspective around that and your prediction. Yeah,
I thought with respect to predictions, we'll do what we did last year rather than do like these big recaps. We maybe kind of catch some things as stories come out along the way. And this prediction is that commercial real estate is, if we're lucky, a slow-moving crisis as opposed to a major event. For the first time in the U.S. anyway, office vacancies are approaching 20%, which would be an all-time record. So got to think, and there was also some news about WeWork reworking quite a lot of its real estate and its rents as they try to emerge from bankruptcy. So that may actually be good news, is that they're going to stay in more space than originally might have been predicted, because they got like $8 billion in rent relief, which is hard to get your head around that kind of number. So again, I think more pressures, more of the kind of shift we've seen between day parts and so forth that affect retail spending.
Let's talk about your prediction. I think it was number 12, health-related services ready for their close-up. Amazon certainly has been investing in health-related services for many years. I think of other brands. What have you noticed lately that has caught your attention?
Well, I thought this was interesting, not totally unexpected, but not something I was contemplating when I thought about the prediction. News comes from Costco, North America's third largest retailer. They announced that they've teamed up with a healthcare provider called Sesame to offer memberships for weight loss program subscriptions. So they're giving a discount to their members to sign up for these programs. And what you get with these programs are access to virtual appointments for diet and exercise and lifestyle coaching, lab work, and then the possibility, if recommended, of getting prescriptions for weight loss drugs like Ozempic and Wegovy, which would be at an additional cost, by the way, in case people think they're getting a huge bargain on those very expensive drugs. But I think it's just another kind of logical thing, I think, for many retailers that maybe are struggling to grow the top line from product sales to look at ancillary services like media networks, like services.
Yeah, let's wrap up with your last prediction, the D coming out of DTC. I noticed one of these, Levi's was in the news, and I happen to be interviewing a very senior person at Levi's at a conference coming up. So, of course, and I used to work at Levi's, so it caught my attention. But they seem to be gaining some traction, other brands going sideways. How would you sum it up?
Well, the essence of the prediction was that if we think about the disruptor DTCs, as we've talked about, like with Allbirds and others, many of them are outdoor voices, which may actually file for bankruptcy instead of pivoting to wholesale. So we'll see what happens there. But that we would still see many vendors continue to kind of move forward in that direction. So there's been a lot of news about Nike kind of realigning, that perhaps they went too far in that direction, and now they're shifting a bit back towards kind of getting their wholesale business a little bit stronger than it's been the past year or two. But Levi's, under Michelle Gass, prior CEO at Kohl's, she is continuing the push there. Now, a couple things here. One was that they did have quite weak earnings. Now, a lot of that had to do with a big restructuring cost. So, like a lot of new CEOs, she's coming in and kind of right-sizing the place to position them for the future on her watch. They reported that DTC sales were up 7%, but as we'll, I think, hear a little bit with our David Katz interview, the weakness in the department stores and wholesale for them, wholesale was down 9%. But this takes their DTC mix up to nearly 50%, and that's about 800 basis points better than a year ago. But the other big news was that they raised their outlook. So even though it wasn't a great quarter, they are actually showing that they are pretty optimistic about the future going forward. So that gave them a nice pop. So the markets giveth and the markets taketh away. And in this case, jeans did well, which we might actually call the Beyonce effect, because I'm sure you're totally on top of Beyonce's new album, which features a song that prominently mentions Levi. So maybe that's the reason for the stock, not Michelle Gass's new leadership. But I guess that'll sort itself out over time.
Well, listen, as a former alumni of Levi's, I'm in their camp cheering for them. Listen, let's leave it there for the news. Let's get to our great interview with David Katz. But before that, we are going to hear from our presenting sponsor, Celonis. Want to ramp up speed and productivity for your entire retail operation? In the Celonis Process Mining for Dummies Handbook, we show you how Celonis process mining technology, enhanced with process intelligent AI, can help you streamline performance across your entire retail business so you can drive lasting value from end to end. That means purchasing, supply chain, omni-channel execution, merchandising, and customer service processes, all managed and optimized through one powerful software solution. To get your free copy of Process Mining for Dummies and see how it's generated millions in value for brands around the world like Aldi, Globus, and Edeka, head to celonis.com/remarkable retail.
Well, David Katz, alas, we have gotten you on the Remarkable Retail podcast. And
a highlight of my shop talk experience. So
well, you say that now. Talk to us in 22 minutes or so. Anyway, well, thanks for joining us. We have actually talked about having you on for quite some time. We finally figured it out. But before we get into some of the ideas and theories and history you have to share with us, introduce yourself to our audience. Who are you? What do you do? How did you get to find yourself in a cabana on this day in March?
I am David J. Katz. The J is important because where I come from, which is New York City and Manhattan, there's 1,000 David Katzes, and this is the way to kind of differentiate and brand myself a little bit. Academically, I started a path of neurology. I was a neuroscientist, and my path was to be a neurologist and go to medical school. And on that route, I took what I thought was a temporary one-year detour to work in a family business. And several years later, it turned out I wasn't going back to medical school. So ended up selling that business, went to business school, did some consulting work with McKinsey and American Express, QVC, and a couple of other clients as an engagement partner. Was asked to come back to the business that I had sold to sell it again, which was kind of interesting, and ultimately sold that business to Randa. So that's how I ended up at Randa Apparel and Accessories, and that was 16 years ago.
And let's talk about Randa. So, just a massive player in the retail industry, but perhaps not a household name. Tell us a little bit about the scope and scale and what you guys do.
Randa is one of those bigger businesses that most people have not heard of, as you said, Michael. But virtually everyone who's listening to this podcast either is wearing some of our product today or certainly has it at home in their closets or in their dresser. So we have three primary operating businesses. One is the Randa accessories business. That's the world's largest men's accessories and one of the largest women's accessory businesses. We make belts and wallets, headwear, slippers, cold weather accessories, and some other accessories under 25 brands, some of which you may know: Levi's, Calvin Klein, Tommy Hilfiger, Columbia Sportswear, Williamson-Dickie, Cole Haan, and 20 others.
Any ones we would have maybe heard of before?
Well, there might be some that you may have heard of as well. And those relationships are long-standing. These are not temporary collabs. These go back 30, 40 years as we build businesses together. And that business is global, so we operate in all hemispheres. And we sell, because of the brands, we sell all channels of distribution. So we're selling Nordstrom and Macy's and Penny's and Kohl's. We're selling Amazon and Costco and Tractor Supply and Dick's Sporting Goods, Walmart, Target. So we're pretty much across those channels. And we also own some of our supply chains. So we are the majority owner of the two biggest belt factories in the world. One is in Guatemala, one's in India.
Wow.
Right, so that's pretty vertical. The second operating business we acquired a few years ago, the Hager Clothing Company. So the Hager Clothing Company, by the way, Randa Accessories is 114 years old. Hager was founded in 1926, so we're coming up on a big anniversary there. Hager was the first pant company to do a pre-hemmed pant, where you didn't have to basically have it tailored and cuffed. The first to do an expandable waistband. They coined the term slacks, which was World War II. If you weren't on active duty, you had slack time. And so they made slacks, right? So they had that.
I never heard that.
So there you go. Yeah, that's one of theirs. They make the golden jacket for the Pro Football Hall of Fame for anyone who's inducted. They've been doing that for a long time.
Still waiting on mine, by the way.
Order. Yeah, for some reason, we couldn't get the size right. So we're working on that, Steve. And yours will come any day. By the way, the gold jacket's wonderful.
Too muscular.
It was way too... It's funny. When we were tailoring because we custom tailor the jackets to these gentlemen who win and are inducted into the Hall of Fame, our tailors say it's not really like tailoring, it's more like wall-to-wall carpeting. So Hager's got this history, that's remarkable. They have, they're the largest pant brand, non-denim pant brand in North America with almost a 25% market share. And then we have the tribal sportswear business. This is women's sportswear, Missy's, Petites, the whole, juniors, the whole thing, thousands and thousands of styles. And they're sold only to independent boutique stores. So this is 2,400. So very different than the Hager business and the Randa business. Hager sells primarily department stores in North America. Randa sells big chains globally, wherever they may be. And Tribal sells 2,400 independent mom-and-pop specialty stores with a road force. It's a whole other business. Those are the three. And the strategy there is that whatever business we're in needs to be or become a market leader in their segment.
Okay.
Market leaders make a outsized share of the profit in a given industry, which we can then invest back into product development, people, technology. And so we don't want to be in a business where we're going to be a tertiary player.
All right, given everything you've just said, global business, manufacturing, end-to-end, all the way down to indies, what are the kind of 2 or 3 things, dynamics, let's call them, that you're observing in the market today? And maybe if kind of a secondary question is there any that a lot of people talk about and you're like, that's not a big deal, or is the inverse the case for any of these? What's going on?
Well, we live in interesting times, right? And the speed of these changes is one of the things that I find so remarkable, right? It's just remarkable how much change we've seen just over the last couple of years. When I look at 2 or 3 things that I think are having the greatest effect or are going to have the greatest effect, I would start with geopolitics. Geopolitics is a real challenge, right? It affects supply chain, regulatory costs. It has effects on constraints on what we can make and where we can make it. Employment dynamics, right? What's happening in recruiting, training, and retaining talent in the retail and fashion industries is dramatically different. And obviously everything starts with the consumer and changes in consumer behaviors. Some of this is generational, right? Gen Z and millennials have a different set of priorities in terms of what their value propositions are. Some of it's technology driven. Omnichannel shopping and some other things are driving some changes.
Is the generational thing, is that overstated? Because everybody thinks they're different. Every generation says they're going to be different and they behave somewhat different.
I think their needs and wants aren't that different. I think the way that they approach and shop is different. Social selling and the way that they engage with their peers, gaming being part of a social activity, not going to shopping malls. These things are different, but the needs and wants of what am I going to pay for, the price value propositions, is it available to me, do I look good in it?
Just like their parents and their grandparents
and
before.
just like, those things are not changing. You asked me, but you also think what's not.
Okay.
Right, what's overhyped.
Yeah.
There are a lot of shiny objects.
Sure.
Right, and some of these are good tools. I mean, self-checkout's a good tool, right? It reduces friction in some ways, but it also kind of disengages the customer from human interaction and the sellers and some of that social experience. I think that if you look at AI, which is this, here at Shop Talk, there isn't a session that doesn't talk about it. I think it's really powerful. I don't think it's metaverse, what metaverse?
Meh.
Meh. That just disappeared. Schmetaverse, right.
Yeah,
I think AI is real, but I think it's a tool. It's not an answer. It's not a change. It's fundamentally of how people are going to buy and shop. I think what it is a tool that makes us more efficient. It may identify trends faster. It may improve supply chain dynamics and optimization of inventory flow. But those are, that's behind the scenes. That's interesting. That's just how you build the sausage. It's not the sausage.
A little bit of a pivot, but really drawing on not only your time in different places in the industry, but as I've gotten to know you over the last few years, you just sit at such an interesting intersection of understanding consumer dynamics, buying dynamics, supply chain, but also across all these different channels of distribution. So one of the things it's been a topic of conversation for a while. We've talked about a bunch of times on the podcast, this wholesale versus DTC debate, or whether that's a different business model, which players are really winning. Where do you come out on that?
Well, I start with the consumer, right? Because one place where I go back to my neuroscience is understanding behavior and what kind of motivates people. And for a consumer, whether it's wholesale, DTC, omnichannel, online, social selling, it's all just shopping. It's got to be seamless. From the supplier, vendor, brand side, wholesale versus DTC, I think you and I have talked about this, Steve, a lot. I think beauty's in the eye of the beholder, and the grass is always greener. So if you've been a wholesaler, which is really complicated, you're selling 20 weeks shipped over 20,000 different stores, right? So that's a hard thing to DTC. A couple of warehouses, you put all the inventory in there, you ship directly to consumers, right? You don't have to deal with buyers, and you don't have to worry about some of the supply chain challenges that are inherent. How hard could that be? Right? And then if
what's the answer?
The answer is it's really, really hard.
It's really hard.
Okay. It's really hard, and very different dynamics and different skill sets that are required, and different logistics and reverse logistics and cost modeling is very you get different margins DTC. You're a retailer, right? So look, we get double our value here, right? Yeah, and you spend a lot more than double your costs.
I was going to say, which would be nice if you had no additional expenses.
Right, it would be. And on the other hand, if you're a direct-to-consumer business and you go, gee, this is really hard. I'm dealing with millions of consumers one at a time. Let me go sell a big chain like a Target or a Macy's or someone else. Let me bring that into the picture, right? And it's a lot easier because the grass is greener there. And yes, right? No, that's also really, really hard. There's no easy businesses here. I think this whole idea that wholesale is dead and then DTC is dead, they're all just methods of reaching
then
customers.
Everything's dead.
Everything's right.
Those are pretty much the two choices.
Yeah, you're kind of let's just watch everyone go around naked, okay? Because no one's going to buy anything anywhere.
Well, we are in Vegas, so there's a bit of
there is, but that's the pool next door.
That's true.
I would test it first.
Yeah,
here, maybe here. So just a quick follow up on that. So one thing, and it's been interesting. As some people listening probably will know, either because they were there or we talked about it so much, I moderated a panel yesterday, and one of the panelists was Abercrombie & Fitch, which has been around for a while. And
by the way, for your audience, your panel was terrific and 100% standing room only.
Thank you. That's very nice. And, we get a cut of the proceeds, so that's a lot of money. And then we're, just in a couple hours, we're going to be talking to Craig Brommer, who's the CMO at American Eagle. these are DTC businesses. People vertically integrated, I call them analog native vertical brands.
Analog native, I like
but
that.
part of the reason why, but to a certain degree, as much hype as some of these newer brands have gotten, it's really not that different. Just, starting online in and of itself is not, everybody has a website at this point. So in and of itself, is it really that different, or does it just go back kind of what you're saying earlier? Like, it's all shopping, and there's just different ways it plays out, and different brands do different things, and different distribution channels make sense for different types of companies.
It tends to be less costly in a startup phase to go DTC and to be online, right? You can relatively inexpensively build a good-looking website that represents your brand, your product,
right,
compared to having to open stores.
Sure, except you have to pay to get customers.
That's the issue. You may have the most beautiful online store and the most beautiful, extraordinary product at great prices, and if no one sees it, right, it doesn't get very far. And so now you got to drive traffic, and those first tranches of customers tend to be the loyal ones that you're identifying, tend to be relatively easy to get. It's the next tranche and the tranche after that starts to get progressively and marginally more expensive, less loyal, higher acquisition costs, right?
Yeah.
And that's where you go, wow, let me put this in some large retail chains and get my brand exposed. You may not get the customer information and the data. You don't control the environment.
And you're trading off the wholesale margin for a ton of marketing,
or
your own marketing expense.
But take a look at the really major, huge companies that were big wholesale suppliers who said, we're going to go DTC now, right? And we're going to do it to control our brand. Nike, right? We're going to start to
Canada Goose,
right? So we're going to pull back from that wholesale model. We'll have more of our own store traffic, and we'll do more business through our website. And they're revisiting that too. That's not necessarily the best way to grow and have contribution margin dollars.
Yeah.
You have to be able to, I think, today navigate both of those spaces well.
Yeah, it's about, I think, finding the right balance. I do tend to think, whether it's totally true or not, I mean, I think a lot of people chased or have been chasing direct-to-consumer, more traditional players, because of the margin opportunity. But the thing I think is really interesting, and I don't think we really know what it's going to look like, is the ability to have that relationship with the end consumer and address them individually, have that data, and at the same time control your brand more. It's pretty powerful, but I think it's going to be a blend. I think you're going to see many companies that are able to go full
and that's
bore
where
consumer.
One of the forces making changes in retailing is technology, particularly as it relates to data and the use of data, the acquisition and the use of data. People who can really understand their consumer behavior, really look at the segments of customers and what triggers various responses, and leverage that over lifetime value, are creating extraordinary income streams and profitability.
Yeah.
But it's easy to say, it's really hard to do.
Chasing that for a long
time. And if you're a
time.
wholesaler, you're, as a vendor, you're not getting that consumer data, but you are creating awareness and you're making money. Right, so if you do it right. Somewhere along the line, you got this profitable model that has to kick in.
Details.
Let's talk about department stores for a bit. So you spend...
Do we have to?
We do. We do. And one of the reasons we do is because...
You signed a contract.
Well, I can't imagine someone better to speak to where department stores are today and where they can go and how they're performing than someone like yourself who's working at that level at the executives. You're having their discussions. How's it going? And it's intimately tied to your success of your business as well. So how are you feeling about department stores today? They've been under pressure for a couple of decades. How are you feeling about it? And what do you see ahead?
I think, Michael, they've been under pressure for a couple of decades.
Well said.
And yes, I think that's very true. And I think we have to look at the evolution of these stores. They did very, very well for a while. They were a really primary channel of customer shopping, and they're still very important. But I think you have to look at what was their distinct value proposition, a department store. Now, let's define a department store a little bit. It's a multi-branded, multi-classification chain of stores that sells what I'm going to call moderately priced product. It's not luxury. It's not inexpensive mass market. It's kind of in the middle.
Okay.
Middle's a tough place to play in a lot of cases, but multi-branded, multi-classification, multi-door Okay, chains. So this is my definition.
You'd still put JCPenney in that.
I would.
But they might be at the lower end of that spectrum,
Sure.
but they're still there.
Right. I would put Nordstrom there.
Okay.
They're not luxury to me.
Holt
right?
Renfrew.
Right. I put Holt Renfrew. Yeah, we're gonna go to Canada, and there's that company that used to be called Hudson's Bay.
Hudson's Bay.
Yeah, they still are called Hudson's Bay. Hopefully they will continue to be. Yes, I would call those department stores. I would call JCPenney, Kohl's. The old alma mater for Steve, Sears, was within that, at the time, a really interesting, fascinating, powerful department store.
Yeah.
Right? So product assortment, multiple product classifications. That's what made them department stores, right? So they had lots of departments. Brands, multi-brands. Service levels. They gave great service. They had very informed associates who could help you find what you wanted, and you could engage and talk to them and, how does this look and how do I, particularly for men needed a lot of assistance shopping. Women are better at self-serving that. Location, where the stores were located and what traffic patterns and geography were like, right? What literally traffic was. And the social experience of going to a mall or shopping with other people with similar interests or your friends. Right? Those were some of the things that were the core propositions for department stores. But things changed, right? And things always change. And you can't navigate a new landscape with old maps. So what's going to be recreated and what happened, right? One is the financial model for these stores changed. They became burdened with debt. And when you get burdened with a lot of debt, you cut employees and service levels, and you cut the store build out, and you no longer create, I don't know who coined this term, but you're no longer creating remarkable retail. Okay,
that's interesting. How do you spell that?
Yeah, retail or remarkable? Yeah.
Retail, I got figured out. Okay. Remarkable seems complicated.
So you lose that remarkability, right? When you do that, that's one. Second, competition changed, right? You've got online, endless aisle, much more classifications and more brands, and really fast, easy service and delivery, aka Amazon and others. You have vertical mono-branded stores. Now, these are the brands that sell to department stores. Okay, and I'll list a couple of the ones we work with. Calvin Klein and Ralph Lauren and Tommy Hilfiger and Levi's opening their own stores, creating their own experiences, gathering that consumer data that we were talking about, right? And doing that directly. That you have a lot more of that. You have fast fashion, right? So this is inexpensive, readily available, fashion-related. Gee, I'm going to accessorize with this scarf or socks, and they're going to be $5, right? And they're disposable to a certain extent. That trend is there. Off-price retail. Ross Stores, TJ Maxx, Marshalls, and that group, Burlington Coat Factory, Nordstrom's Rack, right? You've got competition there. And you've got the mass market creeping up a bit where Target and Walmart are selling apparel and accessories and other things that were the domain of department stores, and they get much more frequent visits because they sell food and drug products. So if you look at this, that environment for the department store has changed, right? You look at all of that, and then customer preference. For me, I always go back to the consumer. Consumers are, do department stores give me the widest assortment? Do they give me brands I can't get anywhere else? Do they give me the best service level? Is it the lowest price? How about the convenience, right? These things are no longer, I'm going to a department store for these things. And so I think you've got all of those things in play. I would like, Steve, for you to weigh in on this one, which is, what do you think of department stores and the trend lines?
Oh, I think they're all negative. And the thing I worry about, and as I look at what, we got to hear, and we'll, I'm sure, talk about this a little bit more, we got to hear Tony Spring speak last night, and I thought it was a very good presentation in many respects. But the question that is unanswered to me is, first of all, is there any reason to believe that the department store sector is not going to continue to contract, independent of what Macy's, Kohl's, whatever? But, all the trends, I think, continue to be negative. So for any department store to be successful, it's about grabbing back market share. And my question is, as they watch the last 20-plus years as sales migrated to TJ Maxx, and as sales migrated to Ulta, and as sales, you can go down the list, all the people, kinds of brands you were talking about. What can you possibly do now to win back those customers? And if you're winning on either you're just like those brands and you're loyal, and so I'm not inclined to change my loyalty just because, if the only thing you're going to do is throw coupons at me, that's not very sustainable, particularly when your profit margins are 1 or 2% to begin with.
A race to the bottom is a race you don't want to win.
Exactly, exactly. And then I think convenience is not, obviously we talk about online a lot. Macy's got a perfectly good. I always think the Amazon thing's a bit of a canard. I mean, there's the pricing part of that, but nothing prevents any of these guys from having really good websites. And if they don't by now, shame on them, really. So I think it gets more to people who are locked into the Amazon flywheel, but they're also locked into going to TJ Maxx and Target, and for certain needs. So how are you going to disrupt my well-established patterns that have been building for 10, 15, 20 years and do something that says, you know what? Instead of going to TJ Maxx while I'm out at the grocery store picking up my dry cleaning or going to do yoga or whatever in a more neighborhood center, how are you going to get me to make an extra trip to the mall, go up the 2 escalators, yada, yada, yada? And that's why I cannot work out the math.
It's got to be more than just the block and tackle, right? And because a lot of the department stores are figuring out, we've got to get more efficient in inventory management. We have to do, right? That's great, but it's not making them remarkable or relevant.
Well, and
so the question becomes, why are you a destination I will go to out of my way to literally shop your store?
Yeah, and I think a mistake people made, this is actually something we experienced at Sears, is we had a guy, and it's a long story, I'll make it short, but we had a guy who was very focused on doing all this analysis, comparing ourselves on various dimensions to our competitors, which is a decent thing to do. And so, if Kohl's was a 9 on convenience and we were a 5, we've got to improve that. And I remember one of the guys who works for me at one point said, hey, I'm not going to say who it was, but to this executive, he said, he said, I sort of view this as if, and this is not maybe the best, politically correct example, but if I ask a woman out and she said, I'm not going to go out with you, you're ugly. And then I went and I got a haircut, I dropped a few pounds or whatever, but I go from being a 5 to a 7, and I go ask her out again, and she goes, you're not as ugly, but you're still kind of ugly. No. And so the point of this is like closing the gap is not enough if you don't get to the bar that is going to cause me to switch. So all this executional stuff may be fine. It's not necessarily going to get you a lot of money when loyalties are so well cemented.
To riff off your story of you're not quite good looking enough, even though you got
don't,
better.
You
I'm not talking about
what you say.
Okay, I'm not. Yes, but
that was a friend who said it.
You put that out there. I understand. It was a friend. So let's talk to your friend.
You're
a
both
little bit.
good-looking gentlemen. I can see that.
There is a neuroscience and psychological principle that says
I knew we were going to get back to your neuroscience
We're going
expertise.
to. I go there a lot. It's not that you need to be better looking. You need to be better looking than the best alternative that's available to me. Right. So it's really
that's the you don't have to run faster than the bear kind of scenario.
Yeah, right. And so if you're going to be focused on service and experience, you have to be better than the competitor's service level. If you're going to be about brands, your brand assortment has to be more relevant and more powerful than your competitor. If you're about price, you have to be pricing and and work these variables. So it's not arbitrary. You're a 5, you're a 7.
Yeah.
It's my competitor is a 4. I have to be a 5.
Right. And I think and I don't know that I can prove this, but I think the other thing is, I believe generally people don't, if they're quite loyal to a particular company, they don't easily switch.
I think that
they don't trust you.
I think
so
that
much.
was true. I think we see less brand loyalty and retailer loyalty
It's
today.
too easy to experiment.
It's just too easy.
Yeah. No,
you were a Calvin Klein customer. You dressed Calvin Klein head to toe, right?
I think the COVID era shook that up too, because people were trying to find something and their traditional choice was closed or out of stocks, and they discovered something new, and then they broke a habit.
Yeah.
Right. It's hard to break habits, as you very well know. Right.
Yeah. So we're coming up on our time, but I wanted to maybe get one more kind of broad question. And you talked a little bit about fast fashion. The hottest retailers on the planet right now, as many people will know, are Shein and Temu. And I'm curious, both from a standpoint of what do you think their impact on retail going forward might be, but more particular kind of how you feel about them, I guess, in your business.
I was so hoping you were not going to go there. Okay. Well, first, these are remarkably successful retailers. Okay, they're very good. They're models. These are smart people doing some fascinating scaled things. First, landfill is filled with billions of products, and this becomes, in our sustainable age, a real challenge about fast fashion in general. Right. So you've got one issue on that. You have labor rights on where these products are made and the conditions under which they're made, which are a challenge that they're trying to address. Okay, they're working on that. But for me, there's an anti-competitive nature of this that's very sensitive to North American, particularly U.S. retailers and vendors. And that's a technical trade policy called 321 de minimis rules. The short version of this is if you ship something internationally into the United States that has a value less than $800, there are no tariffs or duties on it.
Right.
The two companies that Stephen mentioned, Shein and Temu, last year shipped 3.1 billion separate units into the United States.
Billion with a B, in case you can't hear that with the helicopter. Now,
That's a Shein helicopter over us, by the way. And
That's right.
Yeah.
Now let me give you, I won't say an alternative position around anti-competitiveness. It exists. Just like Amazon exploited a little quirk in the tax system when they had bootstrapped them up. And, there's both the international postage rate union rates that they take advantage of and de minimis.
Right.
And so the only way to close, like if you go to the legislators, as I have on many occasions, and they're like, well, they're just using a rule that you're going to use another rule. Like, it's not illegal. What do you want us to do about this? Well, you can lobby to lower de minimis, but you've got to also put why? Because consumers seem to like it. And, these politicians like getting elected. So I think it's a fascinating...
It is a fascinating issue. I'm on the board of the AAFA, the American Association of Footwear and Apparel, and we were lobbying in Washington last week, which I'm not a lobbyist, but I was there with them watching this.
The lobbyists love to have people like you because you actually...
you
know stuff.
We actually know stuff, build
we
stuff,
do the
ship stuff,
things,
and deal with consumers. It's interesting. Americans do like this less expensive product, and this product is cheaper because it doesn't have to pay the tariff and the duties. On the other hand, businesses such as ours will need to open warehouses in Canada or Mexico or elsewhere so we can then ship back into the United States and take advantage of some of this, right? Which is going to send jobs out of the United States, which we don't want to do.
Yeah.
There are also something else in play here, which is restricted substances, the quality of the materials, the health standards, right?
Sure.
Are not an applicable standard when you're de minimis shipping in individual boxes. They're not going through inspections and trade conditions, right?
That's right.
So ultimately, is this really better for America to allow this to happen? And by the way, if you think about 3.1 billion with the B units and the dollars involved, think of the revenue in tariffs and duties and taxes that would be received.
Yeah.
Right.
Pays for a lot of roads and a lot of hospitals and a lot of other important things. But well, listen, it's a great discussion. I mean, we go on and on about this one in particular because it's on everybody's minds. I mean, they're clearly popular, they're clearly controversial, and they're clearly worth talking about. And once again, I couldn't imagine somebody better to have the conversation with than yourself. So, David, thanks you so much for joining us in the Von Bowser Remarkable Retail Podcast studio. And if somebody wants, as listened as they no doubt have, and wow, this is an interesting cat, where do they go to learn more or get in touch?
Easiest way to reach me is through LinkedIn. All right. Okay, and remember the J. So it's David J. Katz.
J.
And yes, that will help you.
Don't
from
settle
the other
for a lesser Katz.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, David J. Katz, thanks so much for joining us on Remarkable Retail Podcast. Real treat to finally get you on the mic, and wish you safe travels and a great rest of your shop talk experience.
Michael, Steve, pleasure being here as always and talking to you on the record, sort of. But you did promise me that no one's actually going to hear this, right? So I'm okay.
Fortunately, we have no listeners.
So, now you have lots of listeners, including me. So it's a wonderful cast. And thank you for inviting me.
Thank you.
Thanks for tuning in. New episodes of Season 8 presented by Celonis will show up every Tuesday. So be sure to tell your friends and colleagues in the retail industry all about us.
I'm Steve Dennis, author of the best-selling book, Remarkable Retail, and my new forthcoming book, Leaders Leap, Transforming Your Company at the Speed of Disruption, which will be published in April and is available for pre-order at booksellers everywhere. You can learn more about me, my consulting, and keynote speaking at stephenpdennis.com.
I'm Michael LeBlanc, consumer retail growth consultant, keynote speaker, producer, and host of a series of retail trade podcasts, including this one. You can learn more about me on LinkedIn. Safe travels, everyone.